You, one of the things I love about that video, we threw that together. I think we had a church reach out to us and say, hey, we want CCF to invite our graduating seniors to come to your ministry. And so we slapped that together and sent it to them. But what was cool for me is, Chris mentioned that I'm currently serving as the interim director over all of CCF. But before that, I was the campus minister at East Carolina University, and I was really doing that for about 3 solid years. And I love it. And a couple of my students up there, I'll tell you, there's 3 students. Actually, I'll tell you about 4 of the students. I actually don't personally know the UNCW student, and so I'm sure Troy could tell you more about her. But the other 4 students I've had the opportunity to interact with. And I want to just say a couple things. Josh from NC State grew up at Christ Church. This is a church that I used to work at. I've been there since 2006. My wife used to babysit him when he was like a toddler. And now he's in college. He's studying to be a veterinarian. And it's just exciting. It's exciting for me to see. His dad is one of my best friends. To see this kid grow up in the faith and stay in the faith. And stay connected to God, stay connected to church. So that was awesome. The 2 ECU students, JT was baptized recently, like in the last couple of years, and he has become one of our #1 student leaders. Skylar came to us from a church called Macedonia Church, kind of in between Williamston and Washington, North Carolina, so kind of out in the sticks. And she just showed up out of nowhere, and she has been one of the most killer student leaders that we've ever had. She's leading Bible studies and discipling other girls, and it's just awesome to see her. And then, did my mic just cut off? Okay, all right. And then Jonna, I'll mention this a little bit later, but our UNC Chapel Hill campus minister battled with cancer for about 10 years. He suddenly passed away at the very beginning of this year. Days before the start of the semester at UNC, and Jonna was the only student leader in that campus ministry, and she was awesome this year, and I got to kind of coordinate with her as we were just trying to figure out what to do after Dean passed, and she really stepped up and was a huge leader in that ministry. It's one of the things I love about CCF is that we give ministry away. Like, we invest in our students, we invest in leaders, and we build them up. And I was watching that video, and I was just, all these students, I'm seeing them, but I'm thinking about their stories, and it was just exciting to see that. Chris mentioned, my name is Jordan Clark, work with Campus Christian Fellowship. I am super excited to be here. He also mentioned that I was here last year. I've had the opportunity to preach here a few times, and I've had the opportunity to lead worship here a few times. I got to tell you, Venture Church, thank you so much for having me. This is like one of my favorite churches in the world, okay? I want you to know that. So if you are a part of this church, especially if you're a part of this church and maybe you like didn't grow up in church, or this is kind of like your first church experience, I want you to know how lucky you are. This is a wonderful church. I'm so excited to be here, and I'm really, really grateful that Venture Church has kind of come alongside to be a partner with Campus Christian Fellowship. That's what I talked about last summer, and I remember that because I've been going around and preaching at different churches like all summer, and last summer I preached the same sermon like 12 times. And it was on Philippians chapter 1, and I talked about partnership in the gospel. Well, same deal this summer. I've been preaching about the Great Commission. I've been preaching about Matthew chapter 28, verses 19 and 20. And I think this is about the 10th time. So hopefully that means I've finally got it dialed in. But I'm excited to share with you guys. So at CCF, our mission is making disciples on campus who impact the world. Making disciples on campus who impact the world. And you know what I love about this? We were having the same page meeting here at the beginning, right before service, and I can't remember what somebody said something about making disciples, and somebody said, yeah, CCF is all about that, and then Chris was like, yeah, so is Venture Church, and because honestly, like every church, all Christians, making disciples is kind of a universal thing for us. And our mission statement is about making disciples. Now, what makes, I think, CCF unique is that, number one, we're focused on making disciples on campus. So we see the university as a mission field. And honestly, there's some really unique things about that mission field. I think most of the young people who are on university campuses, they're at a pivotal moment in their life. And really, even the young people who don't go to university, maybe you go to community college, you go into the armed forces, maybe you just go right into the workforce. But that like 18 to 25 window of your life, it's a pivotal time. It's a time where you're figuring things out, and you're figuring out who you're going to become, right? The man or woman that you're going to grow into. And the same is true of all the students that we have on our campuses. they're in this moment where they're open-minded, they're looking for answers, they are trying to figure things out, and they're trying to figure out who it is that they're going to become. And so we love going to the university campuses and meeting those students there. And then even more than that, one of the great things about universities is it's not just our students, it's not just students who grow up in North Carolina, but it's students who grow up all over the country, students who grow up all over the world. People come from countries all over the place to our universities here in North Carolina. And what's amazing about that is there are countries that you can't get into as a missionary. But they send their students to us to get an education in college, and we have the opportunity to share the gospel with them, and then they take that back home with them. What an amazing opportunity. So we look at the university as a mission field. So we make disciples on campus because that's our mission field. But here's the most important part about our mission statement to me. We make disciples on campus who impact the world. All right? And what that means is we love college students, and we love them. We want to make an impact in their lives. And we love the mission field of the university, and we want to make an impact on the university campus. But the impact that we really want to make is not the impact that's going to be made just on the lives of a handful of college students. It's not the impact that's going to be made on college campuses, but it's the impact that those students are going to make as they go out into the rest of the world. And that's the impact that we want to make at CCF. Now, the wild thing about this to me is, campus ministry is this constant turnover. We always joke that it's kind of like planting a church where you relaunch your church every fall, and then in the spring, all your elders graduate. Because it really is, there's this constant turnover because being in university is a temporary situation for most people. That's the goal. It's not to be there forever, right? To be there for a little while, to get trained and equipped for whatever you're going to do with the rest of your life. And the focus is on the rest of your life. And so we like to think about the idea that we have a short period of time with our students. And the way things are now, man, so many students doing early college, like their first semester with us, usually like they're not freshmen, they're like juniors already. And so we're lucky if we've got 2 full years with a student. And so we've just got a little while to make a difference in their lives, but our hope is that God is going to use them to make an even bigger difference. And Venture Church is a huge example of this. And I'm sure there's more that I'm not thinking about, but whenever I think about the impact that our ministry has had on the world, I think about Venture Church, and I think about Brent and Emily Myers, and I think about Brian Boitnott. And all three of them were a part of our ministries. And it's so exciting to me to see the ministry that they've done here. And it's a ministry multiplier. And that's what I love about CCF, is that we want to make disciples on campus so that we can send them out and they can have an impact on the world. And that world could be Wilmington, it could be North Carolina, it could be the United States, it could be the whole globe. And what's awesome is we can look at story after story after story of students from CCF who that's exactly their story. They met Jesus through CCF. They were equipped for ministry through CCF, and they were sent out to make an impact on the world. So that's our mission statement, making disciples on campus who impact the world. And that mission statement is inspired by our text today, Matthew chapter 28, verses 19 and 20. This is the mission that Jesus gave his disciples after his resurrection, just before ascending into heaven. And this is the text that we're going to focus on today. Now, the resurrection of Jesus is arguably the most significant moment in the story of Jesus, probably the most significant moment in the whole Bible, and maybe even the most significant moment in all of human history is the resurrection of Jesus. I mean, this really is the moment that changed everything. And libraries of books and hours of sermons have been preached, retelling what we call the Easter story, the story of the resurrection of Jesus. But Matthew sums it up here in 2 verses, and I love how concise it is. I want to read to you Matthew 28, verses 5 and 6. It says, "The angel said to the women, 'Do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here. He has risen, just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay.'" Now, this is the only time ever that the words, "Jesus is not here," was good news, right? I mean, like, what you want to hear is Jesus is in that place. You go to a church, you want to hear Jesus is in that place. You know, what we want to do when we go to campus is we want people to see our ministry and say, Jesus is here on campus. But this is the only time ever that people showed up somewhere and they were told, yeah, Jesus is not here. And that was good news, all right? Jesus was not there. The tomb was empty. And this is like, man, this is such a big deal, right? This is it. They had seen Jesus crucified, hung on a cross. He was dead, all right? In their minds, everything that they thought was going to happen, it had all come crashing down just like a few days earlier. It was all over. Everything that they had hoped for, everything they thought about the future, it was just gone, and it was done. And then all of a sudden, in an instant, they realized that Jesus is not dead anymore, and that changes everything. They thought they lost. Turns out they actually won. And now it's time to celebrate, right? I mean, if you had met the risen Jesus face to face in the flesh, like how could you ever doubt? How could you ever doubt again, right? Is it like from that point on, just no doubts, like just following God, following Jesus, it changes everything. And yet, just a few verses down here in Matthew 28, we get down to verses 16 and 17, and this is what it says. It says, "Then the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go. And when they saw him, they worshiped him, but some doubted." Some doubted. And you know what's crazy is these are not like these are not the people who just showed up last week, who are like kind of new to it. These are the disciples. Like, these are the people who followed Jesus for years. These are the people who've seen every single thing that Jesus has done. They've heard every single thing that Jesus has taught. And it says that when they see him, they worship him, but some doubted. I mean, can you believe that? They've seen the risen Jesus in the flesh. And not only that, it wasn't just like a momentary thing. You know, it definitely wasn't a hologram. You know what I'm saying? Like, it was Jesus in the flesh. They spent 40 days. Jesus spent 40 days on the earth, appearing to his disciples, going and seeing different people, spending time with them, sharing meals with them. And you know what's interesting? You know, I think something that's really important when you're reading the Bible is when you see numbers like that, 40. It kind of raises a question because there are a lot. The number 40 shows up a lot in the Bible. Another one of these is like the number 7. You see the number 7. One of my professors, so I'm actually in grad school right now. I'm in seminary. And one of my professors, I love the way he puts it. He says, in the Bible, you don't always just count numbers. Like, that's what we do. We count numbers. But in the Bible, sometimes you weigh numbers. And numbers have a weight to them. Well, the number 40 has a weight. And if you go back story after story after story in the Old Testament, there are these times of 40, right? 40 days and 40 nights, Noah was in the ark, and it was raining on the earth, right? 40 years, the Israelites wandered in the wilderness. And even in the story of Jesus, this is not the first time that we get the number 40. At the very beginning of his ministry, right after he was baptized, he went out and he fasted for 40 days in the wilderness. And at the end of that, he was tempted. He was tested. And you know what's amazing? This number 40, I believe that it's associated with a time of testing. All right? And so the Israelites were tested in the wilderness, and they didn't pass that test. Noah was tested in the ark, and when he came out, he made a sacrifice to God, but it says that God knew that the human heart, that it was full of evil, even still, right? And so, like, over and over and over again, these times of testing, the people failed the test. But Jesus didn't fail the test. He passed the test. His 40 days in the wilderness, and then he's tempted, and he passed the test. He resisted the temptation, and then he went on to his ministry, which culminated in his crucifixion and his resurrection, and now he's about to ascend up into heaven. And this is it. Jesus has passed the test. So what's up with this new time of testing? I don't think it's Jesus who's being tested here for 40 days. I think it's Jesus' disciples who are being tested, right? This 40-day period that Jesus is spending with his disciples, it's a time of testing for his disciples. They've just spent 40 days with a man who was raised from the dead. So how could they have doubts? Honestly, I think doubt is a really human response. Doubt is a really human response, and it comes from a place of uncertainty, all right? Think about that, uncertainty. Like, sometimes I think we make doubt out to be this big thing, like this big, huge, like, world-shaking thing. But really, I think where doubt comes from is just not knowing, not having the answer to a question, not knowing what's going to happen next. It creates this uncertainty, and that uncertainty can produce doubt. Doubt is a human response that comes from a place of uncertainty. Uncertainty about what happens next. Uncertainty, honestly, for the disciples, even after 40 days, uncertainty about, is this even real? I mean, let's cut them some slack here. I don't know about you guys. I've known many people in my life who've passed away, and I have not known one of them to come back. right? You guys with me? Yeah, it's not common, okay? And so for them to like, there's got to be some kind of disconnect in their minds. And honestly, I think we can understand that, right? So how does Jesus respond to their doubts? This is what I love. This is what Jesus does. What follows next is one of those texts in the Bible that's so powerful and so significant in the history of the people of God that it has its own name, right? Another example of this would be like the Ten Commandments in the book of Exodus, all right? The Ten Commandments. It's this text in Exodus chapter 20, and it's these commands, these laws that God gives to the people, and we gave it its own name. Another example would be in the teachings of Jesus in Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7, the Sermon on the Mount, right? Man, there are so many great teachings of Jesus that are all packed into this one section of the book of Matthew, and we call it the Sermon on the Mount. Well, we call this the Great Commission. Jesus responded to their doubts by giving them a mission. Now, I've been working at CCF since the beginning of 2021. And I got to tell you, and Troy can attest to this, man, my time at CCF has been an ongoing lesson in uncertainty. And I know Troy, you know, I don't know if you were doing the mental math in your mind when he said that when he started on campus, that his first semester was the spring of 2020. What happened in the spring of 2020? Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty big deal. So actually, it's kind of funny because that's around the time that my story started. I met Troy. I didn't even really process this when I met Troy. I met him at the winter retreat in February of 2020. All right, again, remember, what's happening in February of 2020? Not much, honestly. So this is the very beginning of February, just everything's normal, everything's good. And I met Troy at our winter retreat. I was asked to come and teach for that winter retreat. And while I was there, our prior director, Glenn Titus, he asked if I would ever consider coming to work at CCF. Now, what he didn't know when he asked me that is that I had been praying actually for many years that God would open up a door for me to have the opportunity to do more teaching and more Bible teaching and preaching and discipleship. I've been a worship minister for 15 years, and I love playing guitar. I love leading worship, but I love doing this more. And so Glenn had no idea that I had been praying that God would just like open something up for me. And I knew immediately when he said, "Hey, you want to come work at CCF?" I was like, "That's it. That's what I'm looking for." And I went to go work at the ministry at ECU. Now, what's really, really cool about that is, you know, I went home and I talked about it with my wife, and I shared it with Tim, the preacher at the church that I was working at. We shared it with the elders. And then in the midst of me kind of sharing this plan that I have to go do campus ministry, all of a sudden, COVID hits, and everything just explodes, and the wheels fall off, and everything shuts down. I spent the rest of 2020 trying to fundraise. And let me tell you, it's hard to raise funds to go do campus ministry when there's no students on campus. Okay? I mean, honestly, I think the number one response I got was, are you sure like right now is the best time for you to do this? But I was convinced, and I saw it through, and I'll be honest with you, God provided. And you know, I ended up going, you know, I spent about 9 months full-time fundraising from the beginning of 2021 until fall semester of 2021 began. And that was my first time on campus. And I got to tell you, it was wild, it was crazy, and it was awesome to see how God provided for me to be able to do that. And fall of 2021 was an interesting time. And I knew, you know, people said, "Oh, there's no students on campus," but I knew that they were coming back eventually. And I knew that when they did, that everything that they had been through in the last year, that they would be like disconnected, that they would be looking for community, that they would be looking for answers, they'd be looking for like some kind of hope. I mean, gosh. And it wasn't just 2020 and COVID, it was like the election year, and just everything that year was just insane, and people were exhausted. And when I got to campus that fall, you know, one of the wildest things was that our seniors that year, that fall, they had only had one full year on campus, their freshman year. Our juniors had one full semester before they were sent home in the spring of 2020. Our sophomores had never been on campus. They had been remote the whole time. And then our freshmen were freshmen. So, you know, like everybody was new, nobody was connected, and everybody was looking for community. They were looking for that. And I knew that God had put us there for that time and that purpose. and that we had to be ready. And I got to tell you, it's been great to see how God has blessed our ministry and helped it continue to grow. But it hasn't been smooth sailing. We've had ups and downs at CCF. One of the biggest things that we've had is financial ups and downs. Our ministry has gone through some financial crisis over the last couple of years, and Venture Church has been a huge partner financially in helping to fund our ministry, and we're incredibly grateful for that. But honestly, even bigger than just Venture Church, like God really has provided for us. And I want to tell you guys, we finished so our fiscal year runs July through June. So it changes over in the summer. We finished last fiscal year like $300 in the black, okay? Which is good because we had been in the red for years. And so we finished like $300 in the black. We finished this past fiscal year, the one that just started, that just ended in June. We finished at almost $70,000 in the black, which is a huge, huge step in the right direction for our ministry. We have been working really, really hard to kind of get through this financial crisis, and God has blessed us every step of the way. But we've had our financial concerns, our ups and downs. We've had staffing shortages. I'll be honest with you, I am lucky to work at ECU where I have a whole team. When I was fully focused on ECU, it was me and two other full-time campus ministers. One of them was a women's minister, and we had another part-time women's minister. So we had a staff of 4 people. And it enabled us to do so much on campus at ECU. But at UNCW and at Chapel Hill and at NC State, we have one single campus minister who is basically doing the whole ministry by himself. Now, we've just recently hired a second campus minister at NC State, and we're in the process of getting that rolling. But I've been blessed to have this whole team of people, but I think our ministry as a whole, we need more staff. We need more ministers, and we're looking for more ministers so that we could grow these ministries. We also are in need of director. Chris made a point of saying that I'm the interim director, and I do not plan to continue being the director. I felt drawn into this ministry because I wanted to preach and teach and make disciples, and I feel like I do way less of that as the director than I did as a campus minister. So I'm not going to be doing this director role much longer, so we need a director for our ministry. We experienced the loss of our UNC Chapel Hill campus minister at the beginning of this year. And just so you understand how devastating that loss is, this guy was a one-of-a-kind guy. I mean, just in general, just take campus ministry out of the picture. I have known this guy. His name was Dean Owens, and I knew him since I was in middle school. I knew him since the mid-90s. He was the youth minister. I don't think he was really Chris's youth minister, was he? Maybe he was Lindsay's youth minister at Chris's home church. He kind of came in around the time Chris was graduating and going off to college. But Chris has known him forever, and he was just an absolutely amazing guy. And he had been working at CCF for over 2 decades. For us to have a campus minister who's been there that long, and for us to lose him, for him to pass away from cancer, it was devastating. I mean, that was incredibly difficult. And it's wild to me that it's only just been since 2021. It's only been 4 years for me. But a lot has happened in 4 years, and it's been full of uncertainty. Remember I said that's where doubt comes from. It comes from a place of uncertainty. But CCF has remained focused on our mission of making disciples on campus who impact the world. But I would be lying to you if I told you that the fear that comes from uncertainty had never crept into my heart and made me wonder if I made the right decision. If I ever doubted, was this a good idea? Should I have done this? But it's that mission of CCF that continues to drive all of us, not just me, but all of our staff. It drives us in the face of the uncertainty that me and my co-ministers at all 4 campuses that we face. And I got to tell you, the staff of CCF is some of the most tenacious people that I've ever met in my life. I think other people would be distracted or would be discouraged, and they would give up. And these guys have stayed true to the mission and stayed focused, and it's really awesome to see. Now, I'm sure most of you have had an experience like this before. I don't want to knock anything over. I'm sure most of y'all have had an experience like this before, where you decide on a course of action and then you have second thoughts. Maybe you've experienced buyer's remorse. Anybody experienced buyer's remorse? That first month you drive home with the big truck, and that's a great month. It's like I'm enjoying my truck. I'm driving it around. Everything's great, and then you get that first bill in the mail, and you're like, maybe this was a mistake. Right? No show of hands. Nobody answer this, but anybody ever had cold feet? Yeah. Don't answer that one. Maybe you met the love of your life, and you decide to pop the question, and then you meet their family, and you have second thoughts. So, like a little bit of a word to the wise: if you have not popped the question yet, meet the family first. Yeah. So you ever had second thoughts? I know that there are people who made the decision to follow Jesus and has second thoughts. Look, honestly, Jesus brings healing. Jesus brings peace. Jesus brings rest. Jesus brings so many good things. But Jesus also says, if you want to be my disciple, you have to take up your cross and follow after me. Jesus does not promise that life is going to be easy. And how many people make that decision to follow Jesus? Because of all these true, good reasons. And then when life gets difficult, they start to have second thoughts. Maybe I shouldn't have signed up for this. The people in the Bible are no different from us. The people in the Bible are no different from us. I mean, have you ever thought if I had just seen that, I would never doubt? If I had just seen Moses part the Red Sea, I would never doubt God again. If I had seen the walls of Jericho come crumbling down, I would never have another doubt in my life. If I had seen the miracles of Jesus, if I had seen the blind given their sight, right, I would never doubt again. If I had seen the resurrection, if I had seen the risen Lord Jesus, I would never doubt again. But you know that that's not true. Because like the Apostle Peter, we have the tendency to step out and walk on the water, and then we lose sight of the one that we put our faith in. We step out, and then we lose sight of Jesus, and we get distracted. We get distracted by all the chaos in our lives, the chaos on the news. We get distracted by these things, and we start to have doubt because we have uncertainty. Look, what's crazy about this is Jesus calls us to follow him, but he doesn't tell us he's going to give us all the answers. He doesn't tell us he's going to, he doesn't give us an itinerary for our lives. He doesn't explain everything. And so we follow Jesus even in the face of uncertainty. But that's where sometimes we lose sight of Jesus and we start to focus on the things that we're uncertain about. We lose sight of the reality that Jesus has already won. And Jesus' disciples were no different. So their response when they saw him was that they worshiped him, but some doubted. And worship is the correct response. Man, one of my favorite things about going around and preaching at different churches this summer and last summer is getting to worship with so many different churches. It really is just awesome, just hearing different songs at different churches, different styles of worship, but really just hearing other Christians singing and praising God. It's just an encouraging thing every single week. Worship is the correct response because Jesus alone is worthy of our worship. But doubt is the emotional human response. And we give like doubting Thomas, the Apostle Thomas, we give him such a bad rap, but he wasn't even the only one who had doubts. It tells us here that as the disciples came to meet Jesus, that many of them had doubts. And you need to know that it's okay to have doubts and uncertainties. And this is something I deal with students all the time. They have questions. They're not sure. They're not convinced. It's okay to have doubts and uncertainties because there's a difference between having doubts or questions and rejecting Jesus. There's a difference between having doubts or questions and rejecting Jesus. Jesus doesn't expect us to have the answer to every question. And so I want to invite you all to live in that tension, the same tension that the disciples were living in, the tension between worship and doubt. Throughout the Bible, God invites people to wrestle with him. In fact, that's where the name Israel comes from. The name Israel literally means wrestles with God. And it's not just the name of a nation, but it's the name that God gave to a guy named Jacob after a literal wrestling match with God. And God blesses him and gives him the name Israel, wrestles with God. Now, me and one of my co-ministers, Connie, got to teach a workshop at CCYC, and it was about wrestling with God. And one of the things that we said is that God's not afraid to wrestle with us because he's a better wrestler. And it's impossible to wrestle from across the room. See, this is why God invites us to wrestle with him. Because if we're going to wrestle with God, we've got to get in close. And God is not afraid of us getting in close. God wants people who won't settle for easy answers because he doesn't offer any easy answers. And this is because God is God and we are not. Isaiah chapter 55, verses 8 and 9 sums it up. It says, "For my thoughts," this is God speaking, "for my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." You know, it can be easy to doubt because it's hard to wrap our minds around God. God is beyond our comprehension. It's hard to wrap your mind around God. It's hard to understand everything because God is beyond us, and that's exactly why he's worthy to be worshiped. And we know that it's possible to have doubts and to still worship because we read that the disciples are doing it here in Matthew. We have to learn to live in that same tension between worship and doubt. Jesus is not worried about their doubts. He responds to their doubts by giving them a mission. But before that, there's something that they need to know. So in verse 18, this is what Jesus says. It's one of the most encouraging verses in all of the Bible. Jesus came to them and said, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me." Every authority is under the umbrella of King Jesus' authority. Every source of authority ultimately will answer to Jesus. But that doesn't mean that every authority is good. It doesn't mean that that authority is never abused. But what it does mean is that ultimately when authority is abused, that Jesus is going to make that right in the long run. Jesus' authority is over all. And this is what we mean when we say that God is in control. Not that he controls every decision or every tiny detail, but that all authority belongs to God. Jesus responds to their doubt and probably their worries literally about the authorities, right? Because who was it that just crucified Jesus? It was the Roman authorities, the Roman Empire. It was the Jewish ruling council. They were called the Sanhedrin, right? The chief priests and the Pharisees and the Sadducees had come together. These different groups, these authorities, had exercised their authorities to execute Jesus. And so, do you think that the disciples are worried about what the authorities are going to do? How are they going to respond to this new message that Jesus is risen from the dead? I mean, they went to pretty great lengths to kill him in the first place. Even if they believe that Jesus is risen, they're probably not going to be happy about it. And so they've got these doubts, they've got these uncertainties, and Jesus says it's okay because all authority has been given to me. We don't have to have it all figured out. We don't have to have the answer to every question because all authority has been given to Jesus. And so Jesus, from his position of authority, not worried about their doubts, he gives them a mission. And we're going to break this down starting in verse 19. He says, "Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, I'm going to stop right there. Go and make disciples of all nations. I don't want to get ahead of myself. All right, important thing about this. He says, "Therefore, go and make disciples." A lot of times we think that his command is to go. And a lot of times that makes us feel like this is something that's like for missionaries and church planters, but it's not for me, especially if you don't plan on moving anytime soon. You know, this commission is only for missionaries. It's only for church planters, but it's not for regular people. But actually, in the original language, in Greek here, the word go is not the command. It's not in the imperative tense. He doesn't tell them to go because he already knows that they're going to go. The word go is not the command, and he doesn't have to command them to go because he knows that that's what people do. And you guys do too. Even if you don't move away, that's just what people do. Some of you go to work. Some of you go to school. Some of you are going to go to college. Some of you came here to Wilmington from somewhere else. And some of you who are here in Wilmington are going to leave and go in the future. All right? And so Jesus didn't have to command people to go. It's just what people do. What he commanded them to do is to make disciples. What Jesus is saying here is that as you go, wherever you go, make disciples. As you go, wherever you go, make disciples. And make disciples of who? What does it say? All nations. Now, this is something really interesting. All right? He says, go and make disciples of all nations. That phrase, all nations, in the original language is the phrase panta ta ethne. All right? And it's where we get ethne is the word for nations, and it's where we get the word ethnicity or ethnic group. All right? And so it's not talking necessarily about these like nation states with governments and borders and all of that stuff. That's more of a modern development. What it's talking about is all the people groups, all the people. And America is a multi-ethnic nation. We have many people groups within this nation, okay? And so when Jesus is saying go to the nations, what he's saying is, and in fact that word ethne, sometimes in your Bibles it's translated Gentiles, okay? To make disciples of all the Gentiles. The idea here is that this message, this gospel, this God used to be, at least they thought, was for the Jews and only for the Jews. But it's actually for everybody. It's for everybody else. It's not just for the Jews, it's for the nations. And this is a big shift in the story of God, that his disciples, his people would be sent out to bring the good news to the nations. And so they are to make disciples indiscriminately. There is no people group that is excluded from this commission. All right, so then he goes on and he says to make disciples, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Now, I equate this with evangelism. All right, Jesus said to baptize them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. And the reason why I equate this with evangelism is this. I believe that baptism is the culmination of evangelism. Evangelism, that word means sharing the good news. Sharing the good news of Jesus, of his resurrection. Sharing the good news of God's love. Sharing the good news of the kingdom of heaven, right? So when we share that good news, that evangelism, that sharing of the good news, it culminates with the union of a believer to Christ in baptism. Like that's what baptism is, being united with Jesus in his death, his burial, and his resurrection. And so I say that I equate this with evangelism. All right, and then he goes on. And the reason why I think this is important is because baptism is the climax of the journey to faith. But it's not the end goal of the Christian life. And I want to make sure that I say that. That baptism is not the goal. Baptism is like the beginning. It's the climax of the journey to faith. And then at that point, you begin the journey of faith. And this is the rest of your life trusting and following Jesus. And this is what that looks like. He goes on in verse 20 to say, and teaching them to obey everything that I've commanded you. Now, what is it that they're supposed to teach? Everything that he commanded. There's a key word that we're leaving out here. Teaching them to obey everything that I've commanded. Huh? Obey. I got to tell you, people miss that. But it's maybe the most important part of that phrase, teaching them to obey everything that I've commanded. Because here's the deal. You can teach all day long. We can teach everything in the Bible, and we can teach it all right. And if it doesn't lead to obedience, we're not making disciples. Okay? So teaching that leads to obedience. Now, a couple of important notes here. That the making disciples, this is a lifelong endeavor. The journey of learning how to obey everything that Jesus has commanded, this is something that takes your whole life, okay? And then the second thing is this. You can teach all the right doctrine. And honestly, I'm for good doctrine, right? You can teach all the right doctrine, and if that teaching doesn't lead to obedience, you have not made disciples. And this is why Christian teaching is not just for information, it's for transformation. It's being formed into Christ likeness. It's becoming more like Jesus. And as teachers, I think the most important thing about our teaching is the example that we set with our lives. We have to be people, in order for me to teach somebody in a way that leads to their transformation into Christ likeness, I have to be a person who's been transformed into Christ likeness. Now, we often have this distinction in the church world between what we call evangelism and what we call discipleship. Chris and I were talking about this this week. When we think of discipleship, a lot of times we think of like Bible studies or like mentoring, and we think of evangelism as reaching the lost. But Jesus actually frames it differently here. It's not two things. That's a false dichotomy. Evangelism over here and discipleship over here. It's all one thing. It's making disciples. And you can't make a disciple without sharing Jesus with them. You know, how can you make a disciple of Jesus without telling them the good news about Jesus? So you have to evangelize, and everybody, whether you grew up in the church and you knew about it from the moment that you can remember, or whether you just heard about Jesus this morning, like somebody told you about Jesus. So every follower of Jesus was evangelized at some point or another. They were told the good news about Jesus. And so we evangelize, and then we learn how to live out that life of following Jesus. Evangelism is leading people to Christ, to his kingdom, culminating with baptism. And spiritual formation is what I call the second part, teaching that leads to transformation into the likeness of Christ, expressed through our obedience. So to recap here, we make disciples of everyone. Nobody's excluded. We baptize them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and we teach them to live in obedience to the commands of Christ. Now, this might seem like a daunting task, but good news, Jesus is with us in this mission. And so this is how he wraps up. He says, "And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age." See, we make disciples, and it's our mission at CCF to make disciples. It's basically your mission here at Venture to make disciples. But we don't do this alone. We do it with Jesus. And there's no way that we could do it alone. You know, we do this with one another. We do this with the church. Last summer when I came, I talked about partnership in the gospel. Okay? That's one of our core values at CCF is our ministry partners, recognizing that we have a shared mission with every other Christian that we encounter, that we have the same mission. It's not just an individual thing. We do it together as a church. And as a church, we join together with other churches and other ministries around the world and throughout history, empowered by the present Christ. If Jesus wasn't in it, man, we wouldn't be able to do anything. We wouldn't be able to accomplish anything. But because Jesus is in it, God's power is at work in and through our church, in and through our ministry, in and through the capital C church around the world and throughout history. And we don't just do it together, we do it with Jesus. Ephesians chapter 1 talks about how Christ is the head of the church. Look, if we're disconnected from the head, the church is going to have no power. Christ is the head of the church. And then in chapter 3, Paul writes about how he prays that the Ephesians would be empowered by the indwelling of Christ in their hearts. Christ is in our hearts. And Christ in our hearts, he empowers us to be able to know God's love. I mean, that's the most amazing thing. Is I would have expected Paul to say that he was praying that the Ephesians would be empowered by Christ in their hearts so that they could do great things, so that they could spread the gospel, so that they could plant more churches. But that's not what he says. He says, I want to pray. I'm praying that God would empower you by Christ in your hearts so that you can know God's love that surpasses knowledge. I mean, this is huge. And then he goes on in that same text to talk about how it's God who's able to do far more than we could ever ask or imagine. Man, it's not about our power to accomplish anything. It's Christ in us that enables all of this. So the last few years have been filled with all kinds of turmoil, all kinds of ups and downs at CCF and our ministry, but really in the world. I mean, everybody's experiencing this, whether it's the economy, whether it's the stress of watching the news and the global geopolitics and all the wars and all the things that are happening right now. We need to understand that these things are real. They're real. And they have real effects on real people's lives. But these things are not eternal. You know, I talked earlier about the ups and downs over the last 4 years at CCF. And the truth is, there was a minute there where we weren't sure if CCF was going to make it. And praise God that he has provided and the ministry is doing better now. But the truth is, ministries come and go. And probably there will be a one day, hopefully far in the future. We're celebrating our 50th anniversary next year. Man, how amazing would it be for CCF to celebrate another 50 years of ministry? So hopefully far in the future, but there's going to come a day where CCF is not a thing anymore. And the same is true, honestly, of Venture Church. And again, I hope that it's many, 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 many years in the future. Ministries come and go, churches come and go, but the church's mission to make disciples, it goes on. It's true of CCF and it's true of Venture Church. Venture is a God-chasing, grace-shaped love agents shining light in dark places. That's who you guys are. And look, this is basically about making disciples. Shining light, that's sharing the good news of Jesus. Sometimes you do it by literally talking about Jesus, and sometimes you just do it by helping your neighbor. Chasing God and being shaped by grace into agents of God's love. This is what it means to be spiritually formed by God. You know, we all have different ways of saying the same mission. And we all share that same mission. And with Jesus leading us, that mission can't fail. It's so easy for us to be like Peter and to see the crashing waves and the storms of life and let those things distract us. To watch the news and let the global chaos scare us. But don't take your eyes off the prize. Don't take your eyes off Jesus. Don't lose sight of the mission. 1 John chapter 2, verse 17 says that the world and its desires pass away. But whoever does the will of God lives forever. The world and its desires is already passing away. That's already happening. We remain in the world, but we are not of the world. We are the presence of the kingdom of heaven here in the world. We are a signpost pointing people to Jesus. And here on this earth and in this life, we live in the tension of worship and doubt. We live in the tension between the kingdom here and the kingdom yet to come. We take up the mission of God, and his mission is to draw all people to himself. And we know that God will not fail in his mission. The invitation to Jesus is an invitation to his mission. I mean, I said earlier that Jesus gave them a mission, but really what he did is he invited them to join him in his mission. And so the invitation to Jesus is an invitation to mission. And this invitation is for everyone. You know, even if you're not a disciple, if you're in here today and you don't know Jesus, or you haven't decided whether you believe in Jesus, or like you're just kind of in process right now, you need to understand that this invitation is for you too. Because there is no invitation to Jesus without the invitation to his mission. Jesus is inviting you to join him in his mission and to follow him into eternal life. And so I want you to reflect on this, and I'm going to wrap up. We're going to go into our time of communion. But I think that we need to be hearers. We need to be hearers of the word, but not just hearers. We need to be doers. And so what do you need to do in response to this message? Maybe you need to be discipled. Maybe that's where you're at. Anywhere in that process, maybe you're somebody that needs somebody else. And honestly, this is really true of almost everybody. You need to have somebody more mature than you who is pouring into you, who is helping to answer the questions that you have, helping you to understand God's word so that you can grow in obedience to Jesus' commands. Maybe you need to be discipled. Maybe you need to be making disciples. And you don't have to have a Bible college degree. You don't have to, you don't have to go to seminary. You don't have to have the word reverend in front of your name. Like, you can make disciples because it's as simple as this. It's evangelism and it's teaching. You tell people about Jesus and you show them what it looks like to follow Jesus. That's it. And if you're already following Jesus in your life, man, you can make disciples. So maybe you need to be discipled. Maybe you need to make disciples. But I want you to think about that today. How do you need to respond to this? Let's go to God in prayer.